Sam, defend your team, because they haven't won.
Strap yourselves in, it's another 1 hour episode.
Oh, yeah.
Spike defused.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Press 4 to Defuse, your weekly spot for Valorant esports news and discussion. I'm Darth Mike. We got Paul here as well. It's a little bit of a duo episode again. Paul, how you feeling this week?
I'm feeling good. I'm still just man in the fort while you and Sam take turns. I've never seen you two in the same place this year, but we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, one day. Counter-Strike keeps calling us the fourth. But we're hopping in to the Valorant the Children game today, this week. We're getting back into the fun here. And we're coming to the close of VCT as well. So that's a big part of what we're going to talk about, because the playoffs is taking shape, which is pretty spicy. There's some interesting matchups, some interesting implications for these last week of regular season games. And before we get into that, we're going to get into our Run It Back section presented by Temple University. So let's go ahead and hop in. Here's where we review some of the Valorant news from the last week, and we run it back. All right. First bit of news here. Calm is off of a crew. Ooh. Bummer.
Why we got to start on a sad note, man? I love that accrue team so much. Best of luck to. I'm sure Calm is going to land on a really good team. Like, there's not really much of a question about that. Really good player. IGL too. I feel like we say it literally every single week, but I'm just going to say it one more time. NA is desperately lacking in good IGLs, so Calm is going to land somewhere strong. Maybe even bump up to like one of the VCT teams that feels like they need to make a change. Probably not like a guard or a C9, but maybe one of the ones that are hanging toward like the middle bottom of that, or maybe he'll end up on like a project team of a lot of the tier 2 players who are getting shuffled around right now, because there is quite a bit of shuffle, but I have no doubt that Calm's going to land on his feet.
Yeah, I'd imagine that there are a lot of orgs that are hungry for him. I think he's the only notable in-game leader on the market that I'm aware of, right? So if you
At
look
least the
at what a
most
crew has
notable.
done and you have any interest in it, like obviously you're going to think that that com's worth a look, because the reality is the crew is an assembly of 5 players who hadn't really done much before
Hmm.
that roster, right? And so then they come together and suddenly they're greater than the sum of their parts. They're looking amazing. Everyone's making the accrue Stralis jokes and all that. Like, maybe it has something to do with the in-game leading. Maybe it has something to do with the leadership. I think that's what you would look at. Obviously, their coach already got yoinked on over towards TSM, so people are looking at the leadership. People are looking at the structure and trying to see what they can do with it. So I do also. I spoke to Com about it just a little bit because I was surprised to see
Hmm.
the news and bummed for him. But it's genuinely, from his perspective, there's no animosity. It's just kind of a weird situation that played out where both sides need to move on. So that was good to hear, at least that there's no ill will, or it's not like a situation where they chose to make a change for some
Right.
bizarre reason, because it was a bit of a head scratcher to
We've
see that one.
we've had enough teams drop players with really bad reasoning out of
Yeah.
nowhere. I'm glad we get like one breakup story where everything is okay. You know what I mean? I'm glad we get one change where we don't have to just pull our hair out.
Yeah, hopefully it's just, like a mutual thing, and they go find other partners and all that stuff. Zachary is reportedly trialing with a crew as well, so he seems like somebody who
Interesting.
could potentially slot in as a pretty prime replacement, if you will. I don't know if he's still under contract with FaZe though. I'd imagine a buyout there would be
Also, does
aggressive.
Zach IGL?
I mean, I guess he would be if he was coming into this.
Interesting. Interesting.
I'd have to imagine that's what he'd be doing, right?
That'd be a very. I
Unless
would
it's
be
someone else on the
intrigued to see
roster.
that fit. I mean, I imagine a crew is trialing several players, right? So we'll see what they land on.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. But it's also interesting for a team like that, right? Like, they basically came out of nowhere. They're a very new
Sure.
org. This roster was their new
The
org. So
first, yeah,
you don't
exactly.
really have prestige or name brand built up yet, but people liked what you were doing. So you'd imagine there's a lot of players who think maybe I can get in on that momentum, get on that swell, and really become
For
a
sure.
defining player for the organization, which has to be somewhat attractive to a certain kind of player. So that's an interesting one.
And yeah, and the crew was like this close,
So
this
close.
close to making
So
greatness
close.
with that first five, right?
Yeah.
There were like two series where they dropped the ball a little bit in those qualifiers, and if they hadn't, they would be in VCT right now. So there's no doubt that like all 5 players on that original crew lineup are worth their weight.
Yeah. I am genuinely still. That's the one I'm so bummed by that they didn't make VCT, because
We
it
all are.
would have
We're all
been.
bummed.
I think they would have been more interesting than a lot of the bottom rung rosters that we had in this VCT season. Yep. Yeah. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that when we get
We
to our
will.
VCT chunk, but
We will.
get a little of the spice out early. Moving on here. KCP, Kansas City Pioneers, dropped their roster. They're stepping away from Valorant, which is
Yeah. Oof.
surprising. It's a bummer, right? Because so talking about the Kansas City Pioneers, they came in with a roster. It was largely built around Odorous. Then Odorous left, was yoinked away, and then to V1 for a hot second before dropped by V1. So then they completely rebuilt their roster using a lot of the really attractive free agent names. I thought they had some okay results, right? They had Fraud and
Yeah.
Charmadat. And now they're just
I
walking
think
away from Valorant entirely.
I think this just came down to a probably just like a budget thing, right? Like for Pioneers as an org, they had been trying to get back on their feet with like a lot of those free agent pickups, but the roster always felt pretty shuffled. Especially with JC Stanley going on loan to
Mhm.
100 Thieves. I think there's a good chance. Again, I don't have any info behind the scenes or anything. This is just speculation, but I think there is a good chance they saw a bit of a paycheck from 100 Thieves with JC Stanley and went, we can recover our budget a little bit. Let's reevaluate. I hope to see them back in Valorant soon. I think they put together some good teams. And they had a lot of really great, a lot of players on that roster I really enjoyed. I always really like seeing Critical play. I think Critical is super underrated in terms of like free agent Sovas right now in NA. JMO always holds a special place in my heart because I enjoy watching him play a lot. It was a cool roster, and I'm bummed that we're not going to get to see him anymore.
Yeah, it does feel So it feels like this is probably a consequence of the closed ecosystem that we're moving
Mhm.
towards, right? Of having VCT very much be closed. And so you're going to see some orgs who don't feel like they have a competitive chance of making a VCT cycle step away.
Yeah.
But also, it seems like a really, like, Kansas City Pioneers haven't existed that long, right? They came around last summer. This is, so
Yep.
their strategic planning in a game is less than a year, right? Like if it's a budget decision, you're
Sure.
making a call on a game in less than a year. I guess they just didn't like the direction that the game is headed, because it did seem like when this org was first starting up that Valorant was going to be one of their tentpole things, right? I think
Yeah.
otherwise they've got like a Siege team and a Rocket League team and some things going on in those departments, but
And
it's kind of a weird one.
they struggled quite a bit in those in the qualifiers as well.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't the same situation as a crew, right? Where they were like just barely outside of it,
Yeah,
but
they weren't
lost
making it.
out to this or that, right? I can't remember them ever getting super close to qualification. They were always like 3 or 4 rounds away from it in both qualifiers. So you look at that, you look at the roster, you look at the free agents available, and you think, okay, well, do we think that we can make VCT next cycle? And if the answer is no, we don't think we can make it, there's not much like
Yeah.
from a business standpoint, there's not much of a point in keeping a roster online for the next 4 to 6 months if you don't think that you're going to be able to actually hit the goals that you had established for yourself.
So then my question to you is, do you think more teams are going to follow?
I
Do you
hope
think we
not.
might see an exodus?
I hope not, but I also wouldn't be terribly surprised. I think it just depends. I mean, again, I think it depends on a lot of teams' bottom line, and I think it also depends on how many more accrue like stories we see, right? How many more teams just like make free agent rosters and do really well and then get picked up by orgs, right? Because I think that is certainly, it requires less management, if that makes sense, right? It's easier to come into Valorant and see a team that's already good and see, all right, we're gonna pay him and slap our branding on him, than trying to shift the jigsaw puzzle around, I think.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of teams already making changes. I don't know how many other teams we're going to see fully step away from Valorant outside of teams that really come up short, right? Like Immortals have stepped away because they really came up short. Pioneers are stepping away because they feel they really came up short. I don't think that there are too many other orgs like that at the moment, but you never know.
The thing that's really interesting to me, again, from the business side of things, is I'm very curious about what a roster like the Pioneers were actually getting in terms of salary, because the reality is, from what I know, and these are from anecdotal examples and minor examples, they don't necessarily reflect everyone's situation. A lot of Val salaries are very high and massively inflated. And frankly, even if they're not very high, a decent salary for 5 players and a coach still runs you a lot of money. More than if you're boot camping, more than if you're having players travel for events to be like in. I know a lot of teams travel to Texas specifically to play qualifiers and online events because you have the best ping. And the opportunity, if you don't make VCT, is incredibly minor. There are weeks where you have nothing other than maybe a weekly online tournament with low viewership, right? There's just, if you don't make VCT, what you gonna do? Like, theoretically, the back third of the year is going to be devoted towards third-party tournaments, but can you last that long? Is it worth it in the meantime?
And that's where I think we're going to see a lot of orgs at least look for restructures, right? Especially after that second VCT, right? Because you're going to have a lot of third-party tournaments in the last stage of this year, the last quarter of this year. So why hold on to a roster that you got to pay out, just an absurd amount of money for, when you can look to restructure, you can trial, you can build a roster over several months and really have something established before we get to the point where, all right, there's a chance to play again.
Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I think that I think that you may wind up seeing shocks from this reverberating around the scene a little bit more as well. I am curious to see, by the end of this year, because I think by the end of this year, orgs will have a clearer picture of exactly what the plan is,
Right.
in terms of Riot and what that actually looks like for them and for things like, their oh god, I'm going to try and use marketing terms, KPIs or whatever those words are. The things that orgs care about when it comes to having a roster outside of just pure winning a trophy. And I think you may see some orgs decide that it's not worth it, not worth the price that they bought in at, and walk away. And I'm curious to see how that shakes out. But we'll move on for now. We'll move on. Talk about a different org. Talk about Ghost. Ghost have benched Ryan. Ryan is out of that roster. He's the second most tenured player on the roster. I think Nismo's the only player from the OG signing at this point. Yeah. So they are sort of remaking their whole deal. What do you make of it?
I'm not terribly surprised, honestly. Ghost has been kind of underwhelming, to say the very least. I think there are good players on the roster. I always really like watching Koala Noob specifically, right?
Yeah.
I think Koala Noob is a really solid Jet player. But they have come up even shorter than like Pioneers in a lot of these. Like I'm looking at their match history. They lost 2 Pioneers in the last qualifier for VCT. So I am not surprised, and I don't know like the behind the scenes of this move. Obviously, right? Like he's able to explore other opportunities from the bench, which seems preferable to the alternative, right? Where you just have to sit there and collect a paycheck, obviously. It's not like a knee-jerk reaction either. The last qualifier was beginning of February, so they sat on this for a month. They tried out things for a month, and they figured out, hey, maybe Ryan is not going to be the direction that we want to move. So at least surface level, it all seems fine. Obviously, maybe the players feel differently about that. Maybe the org feels differently. I don't know. But this makes sense and doesn't make me want to pull my hair out like a lot of the roster moves we've been seeing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable. I don't think it's an overreaction. I think they're a team that has aspirations of making VCT, and as it stands right now, they're not a team that you would look at and really have much optimism for. So I think you got to make a shift. And I mean, frankly, they could be a team, since Ryan was calling for them. This could be the type of situation where you see Calm
pick up Calm.
Yeah,
exactly, right?
Really, though, that's where it makes sense, right?
Calm and Koala Noob on the same team, that could be pretty powerful.
It'd be interesting for sure. If I'm Ghost, that's definitely someone that I'm looking at. Hopefully, should be. It would be logical. Well, we'll move on in here. I don't know that there's too much to say about that.
Yeah, it's not really.
Yeah, it's about time that they look to improve.
Cool.
Bummer for Ryan. He's one of the old CS guys, so a single tear rolls down my cheek.
I'm sure he's gonna land somewhere. Again, like that's the thing with a lot of like these Valorant, like a lot of the Valorant roster changes we see. Like it's not, at least in my opinion, it's not generally because a player is just bad. A lot of the time, right? Like obviously those are gonna happen. I'm probably not gonna call them out because I don't like being that rude specifically to a
lame.
To an individual,
bully
unless I have
strangers.
Some kind of
bully strangers.
Bully strangers that are infinitely better at the game than me. Yeah,
I mean, yeah,
that'll work really well.
Everyone you talk about is infinitely better at the game than you. Otherwise, you'd be in their spots.
True, that's true.
Everyone who's like, you're not as good at the game. How can you talk about it? It's like, dude, if I was as good at the game, I'd be playing. Of course, I'm not as good at the game. Of course.
But I think it'll be fine. I think Ryan has a good chance, especially if he was IGLing, because even if Ghosts don't like his style of IGLing, he can go IGL for another team, and maybe it'll work better then.
Maybe,
or maybe he just goes back to CS. We've been seeing a lot of players do that too. Who knows?
We don't have any prospects there either. He could come back. I would welcome him back with open arms, but you ain't getting paid. Not for a while, at the very least. All right, moving on here. Sentinels. The Sentinels are at work. They are trialing coaches, as goes the report from one Mr. George Geddes. I would say most prolific leaker, also worst Twitter game in the space. But enough about George. Moving on here. Sentinels continue to trial coaches. They have been trialing a guy named iRemix, who is an Overwatch player, which now means I'm going to ask you, who dat?
So iRemix was one of the original LA Gladiators players.
Okay.
it's interesting. I actually didn't know iRemix was doing anything in Valorant until this tweet came out. It's cool to see him. A lot of Overwatch people have moved to Valorant because Overwatch dead game. But I don't know. I know iRemix. I'm pretty sure, if I remember off the top of my head correctly, iRemix did try his hand in coaching Overwatch. I don't think there was a ton of success there. He was never the strongest player either. He was like a sit-in while they waited for the different. No, I'm thinking of a different team. But he ended up getting like subbed out and then subbed back in when there was like friction with the player that subbed him out, and then he got cut. And then he never really did much else. So iRemix is definitely an interesting choice. That's the second Overwatch player too that Sentinels have been trying to get as their coach, right? Between Raucus and now iRemix, which is really interesting. Just from like a stylistic standpoint, I think it kind of speaks to like how Sentinels really love to just run at you and out like gun you. And I'm intrigued to see how that goes, because I have literally no idea how good of a Valorant coach iRemix could be. Could be a god, could be not really accomplishing much of anything.
Yeah, there's no real data points on that.
There's no context,
tough
right?
to say anything else.
He was a pro player in a game that plays completely differently than Valorant, and that's about it. That's pretty much all the context we have.
Yeah, so it's interesting. But it is, I mean, the interesting news here is that Sentinels are actively looking to have an actual coach, which is very interesting because it's got to be a tricky coaching role, since this is, by all understanding, both public and private that I'm aware of, Shazam's team. Kind of, the five players don't really have any interest in changing much. And so the question is, if you have a coach coming in, how much is the coach going to have authority versus be, an analyst for Shazam?
Wait a minute. Hold on. Actually, give me a second. I think.
Okay. Is iRemix on that?
He's not on that poster. That is that same team, but he's not on that poster.
Rip.
Oh, well.
Rip.
This close.
No iRemix. So close to having him there.
I don't think so. Wait, that's.
I don't think we can see it in enough detail, really.
Not on it.
You could say, I mean, there's like glare on it, so we can't really see. You could just say he's
we'll
there.
We'll just say he's on there. It's fine. Either way, though. Sure. I think it's going to be a Raucus situation, right? Where what Sentinels said they like, what a lot of the players said they liked about Raucus was that he was an additional voice, but I was led to believe that he wasn't like commanding. Yeah, exactly. So he didn't take the reins, but he helped navigate the ship, right? I mixed my metaphors terribly there, but you get the idea.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, the Sentinels are once again, as much as everyone likes to crow about the death of the Sentinels and this, that, and the other thing, and, they're once again in contention for the 1 seed in their group. Rush rotates just got buffed, right? Like we had Anders on the show last week, and he was talking all about like, with the Brim buffs and the Astra Viper nerfs, Sentinels are again maybe going to be the best team in NA, because they're just going to push a site and then speedily rotate to the other side of the map, which is what they wanted to do for the entirety of their history. So who knows? I just want to know if they're going to be the best team in the world. That's all that matters. Buff NA. I understand the concerns with this current patch, but hey, buff NA. Screw those disciplined EU players. Buff
How
NA.
dare they use their brains? Hit W, you cowards.
Hit W indeed. I want to see flicks. But yeah, no, it'll be interesting. I mean, and I mean that speaks to, again, like, do you need structure? Do you need a firepower? Blah 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 blah. Coach could be interesting, depending on who they eventually settle for. But Sonics is our next bit of news, our last bit of news before we hop on into the VCT news. Sonics benched Ian and Crunchy, so that is the sort of the rest of the Australians going by the wayside, right?
Yeah, I think there's one left on the team.
Is there one left? Let's see.
Is Bob still playing on that team?
No, I don't think Bob, so.
Really? No? Then that would be the rest of the Australians.
Oh, no, I'm wrong. Bob's still on that team.
Bob is the last standing Australian then. Sounds like a title for a bad action movie, but
the last Australian. I'm pretty sure that's the Highlander. I think there can be only one.
Is that what that is?
There can be only one.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I'm wondering what direction Sonics are going to take their team now, right? I mean, it makes sense to like make changes because they again, they're kind of like in the same boat as Ghost, right? They were a team that had a lot of heat at one point, and then couldn't quite ever connect, and they've been flopping around tier 2 tournaments and couldn't make much of a dent in VCT qualifiers.
Also, in fairness to Sonics, like all of their heat was in tier 2 tournaments and things like that, where it was like, oh, this team could do something. And then when they hit that top level competition, they never did.
I mean, we said the same thing. It's the same thing with the crew, though, just a different context because of how timelines played out.
I would argue that a crew actually did look good in their competition against top tier.
I mean,
right?
yeah,
they
absolutely.
They were like one series away, and there was one series where they probably should have had it. Like that. Yeah. That is like Sonics never really got that.
Not
exciting
that close.
in any of the top tier runs. Or any of the VCT type runs. So, yeah, it makes sense. I just don't know who you necessarily go for, right? Like, who are you? At this point, it's a new team. So I'm curious to see who they bring in.
It is worth noting, like Sonics in their second, like in the second qualifier, did lose to the two teams who qualified.
True.
Right. They lost to Knights and they lost to LG. Now, those didn't end up being the strongest teams in VCT by any stretch of the imagination, but they did lose to only qualifying teams in that second run. So, like, ouch. But I think it's still understandable. You want to be a VCT team. Every tier 2 org wants to be a VCT team. They want to be Evil Geniuses. You want to be LG. You want to be Knights. You want to be one of those teams that makes it in, even if you have to just barely inch your way in like some of them did.
Yeah, that gets you a lot more brand recognition and power. Speaking of VCT, let's jump into VCT. Let's talk about it now. Let's talk about what's going on with the VCT games. Obviously, we're coming to the close here. We're going to be talking about this last week of VCT games, taking a look at the standing type things, talking about the implications as we head into the last run here. So, VCT, let's just run through the games, shall we?
Yeah.
Shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Sentinels 2-1 Rise.
We have time to talk about the games for 1 week.
We have time to talk about the games. Sentinels 2-1 Rise. They secure themselves a nice little comfortable playoff spot. Zero concerns there. They cannot be knocked out. They have a chance for the 1 seed. Rise still have a chance, but they need things. They no longer control their destiny. They have to win, and they need Optic to lose tonight, and then they're into playoffs. How we feel about this?
I think Rise have looked super inconsistent too, right? It is every week I feel like we get a different Rise. It's not every map, right? It's not that dramatic. But every week I feel like we get a different Rise. Also, Sentinels not throw a map challenge, still incomplete. They have been 2-1 against every single team. They've won most of them. But they've been 2-1 against every single team thus far, which is hilarious to me. But man, Rise is just such a... I think at least a lot of the time it is. Yeah. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure.
Wonder if maybe someone should be working on their warm-up routine.
I think I remember seeing on Twitter that Sentinels actually struggles to get warm-up scrims. Like, people don't want to warm-up scrim them for some reason.
I'm not talking about warm-up scrims, just like warm-up. You could just individually warm up a little bit more, you know.
I guess. Man, it is weird too. I find myself in a weird situation, Mike. I'm gonna be honest, because I actually find myself wanting to defend Sentinels a little bit.
Sure,
just the tiniest
go for
bit.
it. Hell yeah.
Because I actually think every single week Sentinels has been showing a decent amount of improvement. Every single week, whenever they get whatever map they lose, because they lose one map every week. Whatever map they lose, they come back the next week and they look infinitely better on it, right? They adjust, and a lot of the maps, well, not all of them, some of the maps that they've lost is because they get really heavily counter-stratted. And then they go on to maps where they're a bit more comfortable or this, that, or the other thing, and they are actually able to win them pretty solidly, right? Like they got blasted early on Fracture. Their Fracture is now one of their best map picks. Last week they lost to Optic on Bind. It was a total blowout. This week they looked really good on Bind. So, like, I'm excited to see that Sentinels is on an upward trajectory.
Okay, I'm here for it. I'm here for it as well. I think we're doing that little slow-mo thing where we'll then all catch up at once on the video feed, but hopefully audio is
okay.
So we'll keep rolling with it. Yeah, I mean, I think of it as much as you might want to critique Sentinels for this, that, or the other thing. The results, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And right now, Sentinels has a chance to take the 1 seed. And so, that's pretty dang good proof.
Yeah.
Pretty dang good pudding.
And I mean, you can drop a map every week and still win every game, or win a lot of the games. I guess they lost to Optic, but hey, whatever works, right?
Yeah.
The win at the end of the day is far more important than the map win. No, nobody's tracking map differential in Valorant, right?
Yeah, not currently, at the very least, for these playoffs. But we'll move on here. We'll let the Sentinels rest. We'll get into them when we're talking more about the playoff scenarios, because that's interesting as well. But hopping on through the Guard 2-0 Evil Geniuses. I don't know that we really need to talk about this, other than the Guard are locked into top 2 seed, and if they beat Cloud9, they will be the 1 seed, and EG is Big Stinky Poopy.
I'll be honest, I didn't even watch that game. I knew it was going to be a 2. The second map was admittedly closer than I anticipated. I need to go back and watch that second map because it was 13-11. Oh, it looks like we're good. Hello.
We're catching up. We're doing the zoom.
Camera's working again. Love it.
Always.
So admittedly, like, EG played the Guard closer than I anticipated, but I'm not surprised that the Guard won.
That's perhaps the least shocking result in the entirety of VCT.
I haven't watched that game. I do wonder what percentage Guard was putting into it, because they're obviously trying to win. That's no question. But I wonder, considering they knew they had to play C9 in the very final week, how much of their playbook they were utilizing, right?
Well, and now this is another question that I have for you, because now we're going to talk about the C9 LG game, right? Another 2-0, perhaps
for sure.
Excuse me, unsurprising in that, again, Cloud9 dominate. But now you have this scenario where new patch. We'll talk about it when we're talking about next week's game. I won't go on with this too much. Anything particularly spicy you saw in the C9 LG game?
Mata was spicy. That's pretty much all I have to say about that game. Mata put his whole back into trying to carry that second game. B-Dog actually had a really good game on Chamber too. So like I think LG and EG can both be proud of the improvements they've made throughout this first VCT. They're obviously not contending for like a spot in Iceland right now. I would be shocked if either of them came even close to a spot in I mean, EG can't. They're eliminated.
LG can.
LG technically could. It would just take a miraculous playoff run.
Never doubt the Cinderella story.
But they did look better than I anticipated, especially on Bind. I think Mata's Raze is so good, man. Mata's Raze is so good. LG need to pick more maps where Mata can play Raze. His Raze is so good, dude.
I'm intrigued. I'm into it. Moving on down the line, though. Knights beat NRG, which officially knocks NRG out of playoff contention and means that Knights can win and they're in. Actually, they're 100% confirmed in. We now check that based on the head-to-head. They can no longer be eliminated from playoffs. So the Knights make playoffs. I don't know that that's a team that most people would have tabbed to make playoffs at the beginning of the season.
I didn't tab them for playoffs. I had NRG there instead. NRG have been riding the struggle bus, man. NRG look like a team where they come into every series and one map they play almost perfectly, and they are so prepared. And then the other 2 maps, they just don't know what they're doing. I really enjoy watching this NRG squad play. I think, they got a lot of really good players. I like Hazed, especially as a player. I think NRG has looked infinitely better since they've added Hazed. But it just doesn't seem like enough right now. There's some components, some special sauce that can't quite push them over the finish line right now. Whereas Knights, how do I want to say this? I'm trying to think of the most diplomatic way to say this. I feel like Knights, flopping upwards is the wrong way to put it. It makes them seem like they're worse than they are, but kind of flopping upward. Like, I feel the Knights wins, I have not really been super impressed. I've been more impressed in Knights losses than I have their wins, if that makes sense. They play their losses unbelievably close, and then their wins, a lot of the time, it feels like the other team just kind of flops around, and I don't know how I feel about Knights, because it makes it hard to contextualize them. I think this week against Optic is going to be a really good litmus test for them, right?
Interesting.
Because Knights got absolutely schlacked by V1. Then they played Sentinels close, but Sentinels, everybody's played them close so far because Sentinels just throws a map. I think Optic and Knights, this upcoming game for them is going to tell us a lot about both these squads and where the gap actually is, right? In Group B, at least, right? Is the gap between Knights and Rise in theory, right? Or is the gap between Optic and Knights, right? Like, is it top 3 and then everybody else, or top 4 and then the other 2, if that makes sense?
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that is a very interesting question, and then obviously it's going to tell a lot of the story as we head into playoffs as well.
Sure.
Version 1, speaking of Optic, version 1 beat them 2-1 to continue a pretty darn good flawless run here. Yeah,
I love V1 right now.
V1
in the guard, man. I am riding the hype train, dude.
Okay.
V1 in the guard looks so good. Ever since, like, what was it? The very first qualifier, they had like one Haven map, and I watched it and I was like, this team's god tier. Like, they're simply built superior to so many other teams. Because I think it's cool watching version 1 in the guard, because I think they are the most prepared teams in NA on the maps that they actually know how to play, right?
Okay.
I think when V1 get onto a map where they understand what the game plan is, they are simply unstoppable. That first map was really rough, admittedly. It was really rough, and it does give me a little bit of concern for V1 that I don't have for the guard, which is adaptation. Because I did like an in-depth VOD review of the Optic versus V1 game because I didn't get to watch it live. And that first map, V1's attack was atrocious for a long time. They lost like 10 rounds in a row because they just kept like batting their head against a wall in A main and B main, where Optic were just chucking tons of utility and V1 didn't know what to do. They finally figured out, hey guys, mid is free, and they steamrolled the last 2 rounds of their attack. But then it was 10-2 and they got, they lost the pistol and they lost the game, right? I think if V1 figures out that adaptation way quicker, that Ascent game is way closer, but they didn't do that. And it makes me a little bit nervous for what happens when V1's prep doesn't work out, but then the next 2 maps, their prep absolutely worked out, and they just looked so much more prepared than Optic across the board.
Yeah. All right. Now let's wait, one more to talk about. 100 Thieves didn't win a game. Woo! Turns out, XSET 2 won 100 Thieves, lock-in playoffs for XSET. It turns out that completely reshaping your roster halfway through the season is not it.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns out.
Who could have seen this coming apart from everyone? Everybody saw this coming.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not much more to say about 100 Thieves than that. I will say there are signs of life, right? Like, it's not like if they I'll put it this way. If they had waited until the end of group stage to cut Eccles and Baby J and then put in like JC Stani and Bang for the next rotation of VCT, I would have been okay with it. It still would have sucked for those guys, obviously, but I would have been more okay with it because I think this team, this 100 Thieves lineup has a lot of potential synergy. I think they are more on the same page earlier on than the old roster was, but you can just see that they haven't had enough time to prep. They haven't had enough play time together. There are massive holes in places there just shouldn't be. 100. It's like I'm gonna pick on Split specifically, right?
Okay.
Because the old roster of 100 Thieves, like the first 2 weeks, we saw 100 Thieves go to Split pretty consistently, and they had a lot of cool things on their attacking side that I really liked. And 100 Thieves keeps trying to go to Split with this new team, and none of those same things are showing up on their attacking side, and they just flop around and don't get anything done. That map 3 was hard to watch against XSET, man. It was hard to watch that. It for a team to allow Split to go through the map like picks and bans and to just very clearly have nothing prepared for the attacking side of Split is a massive oversight in my opinion. Like it's so hard to pug split as a map.
Yeah.
You just need more play time. You need more prep time. And I cannot fathom what they think they have going there because it has not worked out. The other two maps weren't even that bad. I didn't even hate the way 100 Thieves played the other two maps. They won one of them, obviously. But man, that split was rough to watch.
Okay, but have you seen enough to get you at least a little excited about their potential should they make it into the next run of VCT?
I'll be excited for them in 2 months.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it'll be a while.
Have fun on break, boys, because they are, if I'm not mistaken, officially eliminated. Yeah, no, they can't. They can't
They
pass
can't
RT.
make it. I hope they're not taking a break though. They need time to put some time in the kitchen.
Yeah,
Time
I
to
meant
put
on
some work
match
in.
break more than no. If they're not screaming like almost every single day in this VCT break, they are out of their minds.
Yeah, time to change the narrative as we go into the next one because right now, well, let's speak about the upcoming matches. Ooh, we're back into slow-mo time. Let's talk about the upcoming matches. These are the matches that we've got going on this week. I'll start with 100 Thieves. Keep it on 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves versus EG for the Toilet Bowl. Who is the king of Shit Mountain? Who is the team that will not go completely winless in this group?
Bro, it's gotta be 100 Thieves, man.
Does it?
They gotta pick up one win. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. It doesn't have to be 100 Thieves. They could absolutely lose that game. But man, for the sake of their social media manager, I hope it's 100 Thieves.
Well, okay, so here's free advice for the social media manager right now. Start preparing the meme. You know the meme where the guy's like gets presented with the medal, bites into it, swigs the champagne, kisses the girl, and then it turns out that he's third.
Yeah,
do
exactly.
that, but for fifth. That, but fifth.
They got to take the Sentinels approach to it, right? Like I remember one of the funniest tweets of any of the NA teams this run was like the very first game where Sentinels lost map 1 and the first tweet they put out was like, "We can hear you typing. Please, the game's not over yet. Stop."
Yeah.
And then they won the series. And it's rough. It's rough for 100 Thieves, man.
It's very rough for 100 Ls.
It is certainly 100 L instead of 100 T. They got to pick up that win if they don't want to just be laughed
for the memes
at for a bit.
For the there we hit our fast forward moment. For the memes, I really hope they don't. But yeah, no, I do still expect them to beat EG. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll talk about the other games. C9 versus the Guard for the other end of Group A. Kings of Group A. Game. Who gets the 1 seed?
You're just putting me on the spot.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we need to call this either way. I think it's gonna be really fun to watch. But there's some interesting implications here. The first implication is obviously new patch is hitting, which is going to radically change the way certain things play in terms of pace and style.
That's very true.
Brimmy with the stimmy, Astra with the get out of here bum.
Astra with the kneecapped.
Yeah, Astra cut off below the legs. But in a vacuum beyond that, and we'll talk about the implication of that in just a second here.
Yeah.
How much does the 1 seed matter versus the 2 seed based on the way these groups have played out? Because on the other side, the potential 1 seed, it looks like version 1. It could still be Sentinels. It's either Sentinels or version 1. Or Sentinels could be the 3 seed if Optic win.
I think it matters a lot more to be the 1 seed than to be the 2nd seed. But if you are 3 or 4, it doesn't matter that much, right?
Yeah.
Like being 3rd or 4th seed coming in, no matter who you go up against on the other side, is going to suck for you. It's going to be a rough match. It's at least going to be competitive at the very least, right? But if you're the guard, like guard C9, for instance, right? You potentially dodge Optic in the first round, right? You get Knights or you get maybe even Rise if Optic fall out versus somebody who is scarier, right? So like the guard in C9, you want the 1 seed. Like no matter who is taking that game, you want to be the 1st seed in that game.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for Sentinels V1. I think at this point it is more likely that XSET ends up the 3rd seed, right? And XSET, despite the fact that, they've lost to the guard in C9, they're still a really scary team. They're still a really good team. Sentinels in V1, you don't want to go up against XSET in the very first round. you'd much rather play LG. You would much rather play LG than XSET than XSET, right? So it matters much more for our first, second seeds than it does third, fourth.
Okay. I think that's really interesting. I also think for Sentinels, it matters a lot in Group B, because the thing is, if they win, they're the 1 seed. If they lose, they could be the 3 seed. And that, again, gets you in a situation where first round you're playing V1 or you're playing, or not V1, you're playing C9 or the Guard. Because if Optic wins, Optic has the head-to-head over Sentinels. So if Optic wins and Sentinel loses, boom, Sentinel's in the 3rd spot. And they're playing either C9 or the Guard first round. Yeah,
man.
Right?
Okay,
like,
that would be a fire
lot.
game, though. That would be a fire game. But
it would be.
I don't know if we want that.
But that game matters a whole lot if you're Sentinels. Whereas I feel like for for V1, it'd be cool to be the 1 seed. I think that XF versus LG is definitely a decision to make. But I don't think it's as dramatic as, hey, did we get
dramatic? No,
get run into by C9 in the Guard first round?
Yeah. Yeah, that would suck. Have they said I might just be dumb? Is it? Yeah, it is double elim. Okay, good.
Yeah, it is double elim. The bracket's double elim.
Good.
No one's getting massacred because of a rough round 1 draw.
Well, especially considering it's top 2 go to Iceland, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be tough.
You want that double elim.
But
double
imagine if you get knocked down first round, you have to battle through so many games for a chance at that last spot. Like,
well, and we've seen close, nothing quite like that, but like I remember LCQ, there was some team that got like this close to doing that. It might have been XSET actually.
I think it was XSET. Yeah,
I think it was XSET.
It was XSET. I mean, Sentinels are a classic Cinderella story lower bracket run. That used to be their thing. They haven't done it in a while, but that used to be their thing. So that would be interesting, certainly. So yeah, I mean that's the potential for if Sentinels lose and then this Optic versus Knights game happens. Optic need to win to guarantee their playoffs. If they lose, they could still make playoffs if Rise also lose, but they need to win to make playoffs.
Group B is so volatile, dude. Sentinels could be 1st or 3rd, and Optic could be 2nd or out.
Yep,
that is just crazy.
It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild for implications there. I think that if you're the Knights, you're just so dang happy to have made it that I'm also curious about how much they're going to show versus Optic.
They're in, right? You beat Knights' highest potential placement is 3rd, right? Like if Sentinels has the head-to-head, if I remember correctly, Sentinels has the head-to-head against Knights. So even if Sentinels loses and Knights wins, right?
Still 3rd.
You're still 3rd. You still play either the Guard or a C9. Pick your poison, Knights, right?
But I would argue.
There's an argument to be made. You want to pick whichever team lost that because they are, 2% less scary. But how much do you care about 2% less scary? When I
think there's more an argument that you want to potentially knock Optic out. I think that's the argument. I think that if you look at Optic and you look at Rise and you think that Optic is the stronger team, which I think most people will do at this point, then you can knock them out of the first run. Like maybe it doesn't necessarily make your path easier until you know the group draw, but
if Rise win their game. If Rise win their game.
This all assumes Rise they win their game, but since NRG have literally nothing to play for other than not going lossless, I feel like Rise are going to be battling like crazy to try and control their destiny.
I mean, definitely agree. I don't think we're going to see NRG just roll over and like,
they don't want a winless season. They don't want.
Nobody wants a winless.
They don't want to be the Browns. They want to be the
Lions. So I think the NRG Rise game will be interesting. And it kind of depends like what Rise we get, right? Because even in other important matches, I think Rise has shown up at times, and Rise has gone MIA outside of like Derek. Derek is the only member on that team. Actually, Neptune too. I think Neptune is really good as well, especially when he's on the Rays. But I think there are big question marks about both Rise and NRG, and that's the first game in Group B this weekend. So Sentinels V1, Optic, Knights, they all get to watch whether or not there's any risk to the next 2 games.
Mm-hmm. We've gone slow-mo again on the cameras. We're just in the Matrix right now, but hopefully again that's not troubling any of the audio here for you folks. Ooh, fingers crossed on that one. All right, so
at least we haven't seen anyone say that the audio is slow-mo. Audio's desynced from our slow cameras, but I think we're vibing.
hopefully. There is one other really interesting implication of the way the games are scheduled for this weekend, which is if you look at the Xset LG game, there's an interesting implication here, which is that is being played after Sentinels V1. Which means you're going to know who the 1 seed is before the matchup. And basically, winner of Xset LG will play the 2 seed. They'll be the 3 seed, so they'll play the 2 seed first round. Loser will be 4 and play the 1 seed. So if you have a preference of who to play between some collection of, because it's going to be some collection of Sentinels, Optic, and V1. V1 will either be 1 or 2. Sentinels could be 1 all the way down to 3 potentially. Optic, you won't know what Optic's result is, so you can't really operate off of that information. Actually, you will. They play earlier in the same day, so you will 100% know.
Yeah.
You
will know the entire other group.
There's a potential scenario where if either Xset or LG have strong feelings about who the most dangerous team or who they match up against best is, they have a motivating factor to lose the game.
Yeah. Technically, right? I think there is still kind of the same argument where it's still Sentinels and V1. Maybe there's an argument, right? If Xset really want to match up against Sentinels, and Sentinels ends up as the 1 seed, because I think Xset and Sentinels have had a few games in the past, and I think Xset could think to themselves, hey, we have a read on Sentinels. I don't think LG throws to get either of those teams, right? And do you throw? I don't even know if I don't think there's a
throw.
Risk.
I don't think you throw necessarily.
You know what
inherently.
I mean.
But I mean, I think there's a moment where you go, do we really want to win this? It may have more to do with how much of your playbook you hide, right?
I think that's a better way to put it. Certainly.
Yeah. I think there's a very realistic scenario that they just go very, 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 very vanilla if they'd actually rather play the 1 seed first round than the 2 seed. And maybe they still try and win it, but they don't really put a lot of work into it. I'm saying is I don't think it really matters in this particular instance. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the games, and I don't think either way anyone should really care about it in this situation.
Yeah.
But this is something that Riot needs to think about going forward. This shouldn't happen. You should probably play the low seed games first. Yes, there's a scenario where you get into a situation where the 1 or the 2 seed have someone they'd much rather play out of the 3 and the 4 seed. But realistically, if you're competing for the 1 seed, what you're trying to do is be on the other side of the bracket from Group B's.
From the other 1 seed. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's what you're trying to do. That's what you want to do. So the lower seed teams are much more likely to have a major preference for the first round matchup when they're already the teams that are in the low seeds and are more likely to be trying to scrape that 1 win to get out of quarters. So if anybody from Riot is watching this for whatever reason, this is something that you should think about. Schedule the low seed games first. Schedule the low seed games first so that they can't watch it. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to matter this time around.
Yeah.
But for next time, where you could have a situation where maybe the games wind up being more important or the difference in opponent's skill level becomes more dramatic, don't do this. Just don't pay attention to this and think about the potential impact of these games. It's something to keep in mind for next time, I think.
I think it is especially unlikely to matter here.
Yeah.
Because we're going on to a new patch this week, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think any team, what they show this week is going to be a full reflection of what they'll have for playoffs. Right? There is an additional week and I guess only 4 days until playoffs start, but that's still an additional 4 days, right? Teams will have more time to figure that. This is for a lot of these teams, it's kind of a test run for the new meta. Everything is going to still be very much settling. We're going to see a lot of different teams with a lot of different ideas on how Brimstone now factors in, whether or not Astra or Viper are usable on any maps. What other agents pair really well with these new characters, right? Do we see more teams try Neon because the speed boost off the stim is just Sonic the Hedgehog mode, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it at least, in high level ranked. I don't know if pro teams are going to bother with that because I still think Neon is really bad. But we're going to come into this week and there is going to be so many teams trying so many different things, and then it's going to settle a lot more for playoffs. It's still a rather quick turnaround, right? Like 4 days is not a ton of time between figuring out what group is going on and watching all of the other matches and figuring out what works on what other maps. But no team is going to show up in the same manner this weekend as they will for playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a really good note to end on as well. We got one more thing to mention, which is that Game Changer signups are live. Those you can find those by going to twitter.com/nerdstreet. So go ahead and get yourself signed up for Game Changers if you're eligible and want to compete. That'll be exciting to see. Open qualifiers are running, so go ahead and hop on in there. But I do think that it's this weekend's VCT games are going to be really interesting to see how Valorant changes at the top level with the new patch and how that feels at the top competitive level. But I also agree with your point that it's going to be very different between now and playoffs, right?
It takes time to settle a meta.
And there's going to be indicators in this weekend for what the teams will look like, but then this just adds so many question marks to who's actually going to make it through playoffs.
I even saw somebody, I forget who it was. I saw some like tier 2 player on Twitter arguing that Phoenix was playable now because you can flash out of brim smokes. I mean, I wish Phoenix was playable. I miss Phoenix, but like, imagine a world where we see like Phoenix. New Yoru comes in as well, right?
Yeah.
Tens was saying on Twitter how much he loved New Yoru and he wanted to play it for a pro match, right? Like, there's just no way to know what's going to happen this weekend, man. It is going to be wild.
I love the fact that they still use Phoenix in all of their marketing, but he's also so useless in current pro meta. It's like
my poor useless hot boy.
Like their marketing is always like Phoenix, Jet, like Sage, some amalgamation of those three, and then Phoenix just gets. They're like, okay, you did your promo, put him back in the closet until we need to promote the next trailer. Put him away for now. What a shame.
I doubt we're gonna see. We're not gonna see Phoenix. We're not gonna see Phoenix. Teams will try Yoru or KO.
Bring me with the stimmy.
Bring me with the stimmy. We're not gonna see Phoenix.
Bring back the thick old man. That's what Valorant needed. Brim's back.
Steve Bloom there.
But that's going to wrap up our show here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Press 4 to Defuse. Next week, who knows? Maybe we'll have a guest. I think we still won't have Sam. She's gone to the land of Counter-Strike for a little bit longer.
You two nerds.
We'll be back in action, so we'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye, everyone.